Why, oh why did I wait so long to read Fight Club? I have no idea. I saw the film when it came out in the theater originally. I've read 3 of his other books, Invisible Monsters, Rant, and Survivor. Enjoyed all of them, but they do have a very unique flavor. Chuck Palahniuk is very consistent with that flavor, and it's kind of exhausting for lack of a better word. I don't think one can read Chuck Palahniuk back to back. And I'm not sure what else can be said about this book, but I will do my best, and I will keep this spoiler free like I do all of my reviews. If I feel the need to talk about spoilers, I'll leave that for the very end of the video and I will tag it with a chapter selection. But if you would like to check out a detailed chapter by chapter video series of me, give my commentary as well as summarizing the book, check out the link up in the corner above. But what is the hook? For those of you who have never read Fight Club or have never seen the film and know that is not a fighting reference, what is Fight Club about? A man desperately needs to sleep. Working a mind-numbing job as an insurance claim agent and decorating his apartment with IKEA furniture, life has become, well, dull, meaningless. He attends support groups to hopefully remedy it. Testicular cancer survivors, parasite victims, and to his delight, he finds peace. He can sleep. Until someone disrupts that peace. A woman named Marla who is crashing these meetings and ruining his fix. Serendipity brings him a man named Tyler Durden. He's a projectionist, impromptu businessman, philosopher, Fight Club founder. And he sets our narrator on a course of rebirth or self-destruction. So what did I think? Well, let us begin with character. We will start with our unnamed narrator. Yes, unnamed. He is an insomniac, as I mentioned, and because this book is told in first person, it's a wild ride through his crazy mind. He's definitely unsettled. He can't sleep. His mind is going absolutely nuts. And we get to experience all of this firsthand. His observations, processing those observations, all of the crazy tangents he takes us on. He is not in his right mind, and the prose reflects that. So at times this book can be unsettling. It can be jarring, but I think that is the point. If I could say one thing, Palahniuk really went deep with character on this. Except one thing I'll talk about a little bit later is I never felt fully connected with any of these characters because they feel so stylized, they feel so unreal. But our narrator is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He finds peace, as I mentioned, at these support groups until he finds Marla. Yes, Marla. She kind of keeps him grounded to a degree, but she is sort of an antagonist. And I think one of the most interesting things about the characters in this book is the dynamics between them. So I talk about character a lot. And the importance of character, not just making them unique, but how do they work together? How do they fit together as puzzle pieces? But before I get to that, I should probably talk about the other pieces. But let me continue with Marla a little bit more. She is also a mess, and she clings to the narrator as he pushes her away, though. But us being kind of impartial to any of this, even though we're witnessing it through the eyes of the narrator, we can see a budding love there. We can see that they definitely need each other. But then in walks Tyler Durden. Yes, Tyler Durden kind of stirs the entire thing up. I'm not saying that the narrator and Marla are creating any kind of legitimate connection at this point, but he stirs the pot. He is the coolest dude that the narrator will ever meet. He is basically everything the narrator is not. He's resourceful, he's clever, nothing can seem to get him down. He has a drive, he has a mission, he knows exactly what he wants to do in life, and he wants to take the narrator along with him. Character dynamics. So the narrator is in a bit of a tug of war with Tyler and Marla. They're all playing off of each other. The narrator thinks he wants one thing, and he thinks that thing is to drive Marla away because he wants peace. He's found a means for him to finally fall asleep. They try to negotiate on going to different times to these different groups, but it just doesn't seem to work out. And then Tyler thrown into the mix just stirs it all up, as I mentioned. He's also pushing Marla, he's also pulling Marla, he's also pushing the narrator and pulling the narrator. So you can see that it's kind of a crazy love triangle. And speaking of triangles, like I said, characters aren't just there to populate a world. They are there to work off each other. They are there to create conflict, complement each other, contrast with each other, but more importantly, drive the narrative forward, reveal character, reveal motivation, reveal flaws, traumas, and that is done expertly here. Chuck Palahniuk, for such an old novel, he knew what the hell he was doing with character in this book, and I thoroughly enjoyed everything about it. There are other really funny moments, other side characters that I'm not going to get into, but just know that anybody that Palahniuk brings onto the page is extremely colorful, extremely interesting, but more importantly, they serve a purpose. Let us talk about the plot next. Well, we begin with Tyler Durden having a gun in the narrator's mouth. It is a flash forward. And it is a hell of a scene. It's probably the most compelling hook scene opening chapter I've read in any novel. If you read this and you find it boring, I don't know what else to tell you. You're not meant to read books. But then we flash back to the beginning of the story, the real beginning of the story, where a narrator has not met Marla, has not met Tyler, and we're starting to build up to this point. And I should mention the opening chapter starts with a countdown, and this motif is repeated throughout the book. Expertly so. I'll talk more about the writing style once I get to the writing section, but just know that the writing here is just something to behold. It's something that I completely admired as a writer myself. If you're not a writer, that's okay, that's okay. I think you will feel it. You will feel the pace, you will feel the flow, you will feel yourself shuttled through every single word, every single sentence until you get to the very end of this book. So as we know, he attends these support group meetings to try to make himself sleep, and it works until he meets Marla. She disrupts things. His apartment blows up. He doesn't know why. So he ends up shacking up with Tyler Durden, who he meets on a beach somewhere, creating what seems to be a sundial of sorts. And because Marla has taken away these support group meetings from him, he needs his fix, right? He can't sleep. He and Tyler have a fight in a parking lot. And that turns into Fight Club, where all of these dudes get together and beat the shit out of each other in basements of bars, airing out their dirty laundry, just finally getting released from their shitty jobs, their shitty lives, their shitty day-to-day activities. But then this escalates into something far, far bigger. I don't want to spoil anything. I like to keep my reviews spoiler-free, but again, maybe I'll talk about this in a spoiler section if I decide to do it at the very end of this video. But all you need to know about the plot is it doesn't slow down. There are moments where you think it's going to slow down. There's tangents, I guess you could say. They feel like tangents at first until you see how they relate to the story. And I think structurally that's something that is important to point out here. Not only do we start the novel with a flash forward, many of the chapters begin with a flash forward. So Chuck Palahniuk has this interesting technique where he lets us know what has happened at the beginning of the chapter, and then we get to see it unfold. So he's always playing with this non-linear method of storytelling, and it's very interesting. I always found myself hooked at the very beginning of each chapter, and that's really what you want to be in a book, right? You want to be hooked, you want to go deep into this thing, you want to know what happens next, and Chuck Palahniuk delivers in that regard. But even though a lot of this book is very stylized, as I mentioned, it's very just over the top, exaggerated, gonzo, there are some quiet moments here. There's one chapter toward the end of the book that is my favorite chapter, and it's between the narrator and a man he finds in the parking lot. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it could exist as a short story on its own, and I really think that exemplifies Palahniuk's mastery of the written word here. Every chapter should feel like it could stand on its own. And I think that's one thing I don't see often in books. Most of the time, writers think the entire story is the entire novel, right? They don't think about creating micro stories. And I think it's incredibly important to think of chapters as short stories in themselves, right? You want these bite-sized pieces of narrative that continue to get the reader to push on until they get to the end. I know this is the writer in me talking, so I apologize if it's getting too out there. But while I appreciate the structure, I appreciate the way this book was written, I do wish there were more human moments in this book. There's too many times where I felt like I was reading a cartoon. And I'm sure a cartoon is a terrible way to explain this book because it goes to some very dark places. But when you take something, no matter how dark, and you exaggerate it to absurdity, it does feel pretty stylized. On that note, we know Palahniuk is a satirist. He is providing commentary, right? His fiction is not just story. He's trying to tell us something. He's trying to comment on something in the world, which brings me to theme. It's something that I typically don't segment in a lot of my reviews, but I think it's worth doing, especially in this book, because this book is dripping with theme. What it repeats ad nauseum, drives into our head over and over and over again, is the idea that we have become a slave to our possessions. They begin to own us instead of us owning them. But to make matters worse, we take jobs, these meaningless jobs. We work 8+ hours a day for almost our entire lives to just amass more of this meaningless shit. But on top of that, Tyler is the catalyst to solve this entire problem, because he says that you must lose everything. You must hit rock bottom to be reborn again, to renew yourself again, to do something that really matters. And I agree with that. I agree with that. We tend to get too comfortable in our lives, with our jobs, with our salaries, with our families, with our relationships, with all of these things. And it makes us not want to try hard. Myself as a writer, sometimes it's difficult. As much as I love writing, as much as I love storytelling and coming up with things, sometimes it's hard to sit down at the computer. And I think maybe it's because I'm not hungry enough. I'm too comfortable. I haven't hit rock bottom. I need to lose everything, as Tyler Durden says. But don't worry, I'm not going to go crazy on you. I enjoy my life far too much to do anything absolutely crazy. But this book got me to think, and I've witnessed it in my life. I've seen other people hit rock bottom and then do great things, because when you have nothing to lose, you have everything to gain. Another thing to note is I watched a clip of an interview with Palahniuk talking to Joe Rogan, and he was asking about like what inspired all of this. And we know that Chuck Palahniuk has a journalism background, which, you know, is clearly why the writing is so efficient, for lack of a better word. But more than that, he's amassed all of these observations, and he takes these observations and then crafts them into fiction. And one thing he said that really kind of stood out to me is that men don't really have a place to vent, to get their shit out, like women do. He was talking about how women might get together, go wine tasting, have tea, whatever kind of clubs that allows them to talk, that allows them to connect, that allows them to get everything off their chest. He said men don't have this, and so that is kind of the whole point of Fight Club, right? Is to get your shirt off, be manly, beat the shit out of each other until you find release. Obviously it's stylized, obviously it's exaggerated, but that was his point. But the funny thing is that we kind of see this kind of alpha male resurgence popping up everywhere, especially on YouTube with people like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, someone who is extremely toxic named Andrew Tate, where they're trying to tell you to be a man, you need to be a man, you need to assert yourself, you need to just not be walked on by everybody and everything. And that's why this novel feels so timeless, because this novel came out, I believe, in the 90s. And it is so applicable today. It is insane, almost in an eerie way. So if you are reading this book now, it is completely worth your time, because it feels like it's talking about now, not talking about the 90s. And I guess that's one thing you can say about all great literature, is that it feels timeless. But more on theme, one thing that confused me, sometimes it felt like a self-help book. I don't know if Palahniuk was making fun of that. I don't know if he was making fun of the alpha male trend, because on the Rogan show, he did talk about it, genuinely so, that he just felt like men did not have an outlet like this. And so that's what he wanted to create. That's what he wanted to create, obviously in a stylized manner. But he wanted to show that sometimes men need to let go of their emotions as well. So on one hand, I feel like he's making fun of it. On the other hand, I feel like he's embracing it. If you've read Fight Club, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, how you took all of this. Well, let's talk about the writing itself, or as I like to call it, the cinematography of the novel. Chuck Palahniuk is one of the greatest writers I've ever read. He writes like a journalist because he is a journalist, or he used to be a journalist. It feels as if he has a hard word count that he must hit, that every single word must count, which is a rarity when you read novels. Often, I shouldn't say all of the time, but when you have a page count or a word count that really is flexible, you don't find yourself being as efficient with the prose as you see here. I could honestly say I can't imagine a single word being taken out of this novel. But not only is the writing tight, it's purposeful. Repetition is used to great effect. Parallelism, metaphor, flash forwards, flashbacks, sentence structure, paragraph construction, chapter construction. It's top to bottom just a masterwork. And if you know the story, if you've seen the film, the breadcrumbs of what the twist, yes, there is a twist, which I'm not going to spoil for you, is just completely screams at you. And I could find so much appreciation there to see that he was laying the foundation for everything to make sense at the very end of this, so you weren't whiplashed into the conclusion. However, I do wish, part of me does wish, that I could have read this book without seeing the film, just to get a sense of that mystery, to discover the answer, to go back to the beginning and see how it all makes sense. I can't say anything bad about the writing here. There's absolutely nothing I would change. But, yes, there is a but. There is an exception. As great as the writing was, as clever as it was, I never felt fully connected to the story or the characters. I know that's a weird thing to say, and I don't know if it's Palahniuk's intention, right? Maybe he doesn't want to create an emotional story. He wants to just have a concept, an idea, and run with it. Get as crazy as he wants to, because I don't think I've ever read a novel of his that hasn't been absolutely crazy. And I can respect that as an artist's decision. It's totally fine. But when I read books, I want to connect with the characters, as you know. I want to feel what they feel. I want to walk beside them. I want to feel connected with them, because that is what carries me through the novel. Sure, there's plenty of times where the plot hooks me, but more times than not, it's the character. And I think the character is the most memorable thing in any book, any film, or anything else, at least for me. Those are the things that I hook onto. Those are the things that I remember. And those are the things that affect me the most. Also, this novel felt a little bit longer than the page count, which is really strange to say. It's a short novel. I think it's a little bit over 200 pages, but I never felt myself drawn back to the book. I knew I had to read it. I did want to read it, but I never felt like this urge to pick it up every single day. Not that I disliked it, it's just hard to articulate, I guess. You know, a lot of times when you're wrapped up in a story or wrapped up in characters and you feel that draw, you just want to sit down and read that book again. I never felt that with this book. And as much as I respect it, as much as I admire it, as much as I'm just kind of blown away from the craftsmanship, that is something I need to bring up. I'm not sure if everybody who did the read along felt the same way, but it's something that I really noticed in this book. And I think it has to do with just that distance, the narrative distance, as I always talk about, where Palahniuk, he's exploring ideas, he's exploring themes, but he's not exploring character. He is exploring character, but not in a deep way and not a meaningful way to me personally. Everything feels so far detached from reality at times that it's hard to identify with, hard to empathize with. Which is why I'm going to give Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk an 8.5 out of 10. A masterfully written mindfuck of a story with characters that leap off the page at you and drag you through an absolutely gonzo plot with masterful writing, but unfortunately a story and characters I just couldn't connect with. But before I move on, let me talk about the movie a little bit, and I will keep this spoiler free. So I dare say the film is a better version of the story. There's a lot of scenes that were tightened up. There were a lot of characters that were brought into those scenes that existed in the novel, but I felt like they were more impactful and had more resonance in the way the story played out. Palahniuk spread a lot of these scenes a little bit thin, I guess one might say, with different characters, whereas Fincher in the film never forgot this triangle, this Marla, Tyler, narrator triangle, and he kept that really tight, and he brought that together in all the most pivotal moments of the film. There are some things I like about the book, of course, better. I felt like the scene in the parking lot with the narrator was much more impactful in the novel than it was in the film. It was okay in the film, and I could see why they did it the way they did in the film, but the book's version is my preference. Also, the gonzo nature of things, it feels a little bit less. Yes, the movie is frenetic. The book is frenetic. The movie a little bit less so, but I'm not sure if that's because I'm watching real people who exist, a world that feels real, versus what Palahniuk's words evoke in my mind. So it could be completely me, it could be my lack of imagination, but I just felt things were slowed down just enough to make it feel more real in the film. Now the endings are different. And what's interesting about the endings is they kind of speak a little bit differently to the theme of the story. I can't decide which one I like more. There are things I like about both of them. Because as you know, with any story, there are so many POVs you can have. There's very different avenues you can go down. There's very different conclusions you can come to. And they all have merit, they all do, but you just have to pick one. In this case, when a book is adapted to a movie, you get to see an alternate one perhaps. And I think Fincher made the right choice here. But I guess your question is, if you've seen the film and you have not read the book, is the book worth reading? I think so. Some of the scenes are fleshed out a bit more. You get a very different visual experience. Like I said, you are in the head of this insomniac man with his thoughts just racing like crazy, where it's a little bit tamed down in the film. And there's some things that fiction can do that film can't, right? You have a visual, and vice versa, right? You have a visual medium and you have another medium that is only hindered by the limits of your imagination, which is probably part of my problem in this whole thing. But again, the prose, a lot of times it feels like editing in a film, which is the best kind of prose to me. While it is extremely visual in nature, there are some better choices in the film, but then there's better choices in the book. It's a complete toss-up. I think they're both worth exploring. I think they're both worth revisiting if it's been a long time. We actually just watched the film on my Discord server, and I think we're gonna make this a tradition as long as there is a movie adapted from the book we're reading. So right now we're reading Ted Chiang's Story of Your Life and Others, which we know that Story of Your Life was adapted into the film Arrival. So highly recommend you join the Discord. It was a great time. We had a long chat afterward, and I think it's a lot of fun to talk about the differences, what we got out of the film, what we got out of the book. And there's no better way to get the most out of a book or story in general than a conversation. Well, that is the end of the review. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know with a like if you did. Subscribe for more content just like this. And thanks for watching, and thanks for hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.